Ladies and gentlemen, if you're tuning in on YouTube, it has been a long time since you've gotten one of these types of videos from me. I was going through some things, and then I originally recorded this talk, and it was a little bit too lengthy for my liking, so I'm going to re-record it. And today, we're going to be talking about this whole prize pool conversation. So after pretty much every big fighting game tournament, there's always people that have tweets and they have takes about, oh my god, why didn't this person get paid more? Oh my god, I can't believe they only make this for winning this tournament. And this is much more nuanced than I think a lot of people understand. And so I'm going to try to lay everything out as concisely as possible. And so if you enjoy the talk, make sure you leave a like and comment and let me know what you think. So let's just get started. This tweet happened right after Evo happened. The original one was actually a Punk tweet that said that he won 12K for winning Street Fighter and he felt scammed. This was in response to Punk. It was a quote retweet. And MenRD is like trying to break it down here. And so I don't have any ill will or bad thoughts towards MenRD because the way that this tweet reads tells me that he simply does not know how it works, and he is open to gaining that knowledge and gaining that understanding. And I'll never be mad at someone for doing that. But he does this calculation, 10,240. This is how many competitors are at Evo. 250 is about what it costs to enter Evo, and then he comes out with this 2.5 million figure. Now, this calculation is, for all intents and purposes, meaningless, right? Because these aren't the correct numbers that are going into, especially if we're talking about Street Fighter in particular. Street Fighter was the biggest game at Evo, had about 5,300 entrants. And so this 10,000 should be 5,300. And then, of course, not all of the 250 that you pay to go to Evo goes to the prize pool. Most of that, an overwhelming majority of that, goes to paying the venue. Evo is a very, very expensive event. It costs well over $1 million to rent the venue space for Evo. And that's just space alone. We're not talking about internet. We're not talking about unions, electricity, all that stuff. We're not talking about any of that. Just the space alone, probably between like $1 million to 1.5 million, if I were to guess, right? And so suddenly this 2.5 number doesn't even seem that it starts to look not so big, right? Is what I'm trying to say. So doing this calculation doesn't really tell us much, right? Fighting games have been using this $10 times the number of entrants structure for a long time. I also think there's a misunderstanding here, just because there was a mistake with Evo's payouts in the first place that Rick went and righted that as soon as he figured out. So Punk actually won about 21,000 ish, give or take, which is like fine. But the reason he felt bad is because he is looking at the time that he got second at Evo to Taquito. If you guys remember the Street Fighter 5 Evo, it was 2017. He felt like he got more for placing second at that than he did for winning this event. The reason that is because Capcom put in $50,000 into the Evo prize pool, and we'll talk about why that's not a thing that they will probably ever do again later on. But context matters, right? When we're having these conversations, you can't just say this and that. You got to look at the big picture. There's a very big reason why it felt that way. The $50,000 is definitely the reason. Okay, Evo has actually attacked this problem in a way that is pretty unique to them, I would say. Now, there are other events that do guaranteed like set prize pools. Like DreamHack is the one that comes to mind. DreamHack does it in the way that no matter how many entrants there are, it's the same prize pool, right? It doesn't matter how many enter, it's just set. And that can be both good and bad depending on how big your game is. But Evo did that, but they actually did it in an even more beneficial way to the players. So the way that Evo did it is they had 30K prize pool for each game, unless your game was bigger than 3,000 entrants, in which case it would switch to $10 times the number of entrants. So in Street Fighter's case, instead of taking the 30,000, it was 53,000 was the prize pool, because it was $10 times the number of entrants. Only 2 games on the lineup actually broke 3,000 entrants, being Tekken and Street Fighter. And so this is especially good because the games that are below that, they're still getting paid out as if they had 3,000 entrants, which is not something that most games get, right? So like, it's kind of like an everyone eats type of deal. I've seen some people speak out against this, and I think that it's really selfish to be against that structure, given that, you know, this is a community, it's a fighting game community, and like, it's on the main lineup just the same as your game. There's nothing wrong with the players of those games eating as well. It shouldn't all go to, I just don't know. I think that take is like kind of crazy. And also they did grow from last year. If you remember, last year is when they started doing the set prize pool thing. Well, I would call it prize pool minimums, is the way that they're doing it. They did 25K last year for each game, except for Street Fighter, which had 7,000 entrants. So like obviously they took that instead. But this year they added 5,000 more per game for 30,000, which is a good thing. And people haven't talked about that very much because, of course, these conversations become very charged and negative pretty early, but it is what it is. So Evo, I think, is making strides in terms of the prize pool thing. And also they pay out pretty quick. Like people had their payments in hand like a few days after the event, which is great. Not having to wait 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to get your money. As a freelancer, I know how frustrating that can be. And that is definitely something that Evo is making strides toward, which is good for them. So let's talk about some of the other entities. So let's talk about Capcom Cup. So the thing about Capcom Cup is marketing, and people need to understand that, is that Capcom Cup, the only reason it exists is to bring attention to the brand of Street Fighter, to Capcom, and it's trying to keep it all for itself, right? That's the thing about Capcom Cup. Capcom Cup is not something that is built with community in mind, right? It's something that is meant for Capcom as a company to benefit from. And so when they do prize pools like this, we had a whole separate video about Capcom Cup's prize pool in particular. This does not represent a prize pool that is looking to benefit players the most. Why? Because the disparity between, first place, we do the biggest disparity. Obviously, they win $1 million. The reason they do this $1 million is because it's marketing. They want to be able to say, hey, we crowned a fighting game millionaire. Look at us, you win $1 million if you win the event, right? But it completely forgoes the idea of like this being the biggest event of the year, this being the most lucrative event of the year, and the hardest event to qualify for, right? Like qualifying for Capcom Cup is not easy, especially last year when the format was complete dog shit. It is hard. It is very, very difficult. And you're telling me all of that, like qualifying for the hardest tournament, and like, you go O2, you get $2,000. It's not enough. It's not enough, right? The idea that I'm trying to push here is that if you're someone that's good enough to qualify for Capcom Cup, there's only 48 people, right? If you're good enough to qualify for that and you went through hell, because it is like that, it is very difficult, you should be supported in a way that makes it worth it, right? To me, $2,000 is not worth it for how much you have to go through for the year, right? It just doesn't make sense. We're trying to create an environment where people have viable avenues to make this something that they do full time, if that's something they want to pursue. Obviously, going O2 doesn't mean that you should be paid a full-time salary for the year, but I think that being well off for at least a few months would be nice, right? Like $2,000 is not even enough to pay a month of rent in some places. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm getting at. And unfortunately, Capcom has gone in the opposite direction. Instead of getting better with this, they've actually gotten worse. So for Capcom Cup 11, which is this year's, they're doing the same thing where they're giving $1 million to first place. And the reason that they're doing this is because they can't go back, right? Like they're trapped. They trapped themselves with doing this $1 million for first place. Because now they've created a situation where if they don't do $1 million, everyone's going to talk about it. Everyone's going to talk about like, oh, Capcom's being so cheap, this and that. They can't shell out $1 million. They did $1 million last year, even though over time, obviously player bases shrink, interest shrinks, but they have now, like, they can't one up each other because now your first event had $1 million for first place. What are you going to do now? Right? What are you going to do now? What I hope that they would do is make the prize pool splits better, but that's not what they did. They actually made it worse. Let's talk about how it's worse. So they give $1 million to first place again, but this time, let me move myself over here so you can see. But this time, there's about $500,000 less in the total prize pool. Last year at Capcom Cup, it was about 1.78 million, I believe. Now it's 1.28, right? Which means if you're giving $1 million to first place, you have even less to go around. And so the splits are even more brutal than they were before. So now the people that are down here are only getting 1,500 instead of 2,000. They're getting even less when this is not the direction we should be going, right? We should be pushing for more people at the tournament to be making pretty decent money, right? And the reason that this happens, and the reason that this has continued to happen in fighting game tournaments for a long time, is because the idea of prize pool ramp. And the reason that ramp exists let me explain what ramp is first. Prize pool ramp is the idea that the further you go in the tournament, the bigger the gap should be, right, between the winnings to incentivize, like to give more and more like stakes the higher you go in the tournament. This is all fine and dandy if your prize pools suck. Like in the past, you know, when Evo was under Mr. Wizard and those horrible fucking people, and they had no money to really give around, giving 60% to first place was like the only way you could make first place feel like they actually won something. And then the people at the bottom, like the people at the bottom of top 8 were like getting 1%, 2%, not even enough to cover like their trip, not even enough to cover a hotel room, like nothing, right? It was horrible. But as you talk about, when we get to actual like prize pool numbers, we talk about hundreds of thousands of dollars, we start talking about millions of dollars. We can do this in a way that we don't have to do this ramp anymore. We can focus on paying everyone that participates decently, right? You can still have increases from match to match, but they don't have to be nearly as large because everyone there is already eating. Everyone is eating, so you don't have to increase that much. It's good money no matter what, right? That's what they should be focusing on. They're not going that way. And it's all because of the idea of tunnel visioning on this $1 million marketing, right? They just want to be able to say $1 million, $1 million, $1 million without considering the ecosystem, right? You have a responsibility, in my opinion, as a company. If you're doing this and you're trying to cater to a community like fighting games, you should be focusing on enriching that ecosystem. And they have the power to do this. This is not something that's out of the realm of possibility at all. And the reason that we know that it's possible is because there's other entities that have their own problems, but they're doing it in a better way. It's not perfect, but it's in a better way. So this is Esports World Cup. Let me move myself over here. Right, I'm gonna go all the way up here. This is Esports World Cup, right? And so they had $1 million prize pool for Street Fighter 6, but they did not hand first place $1 million, right? First place got 300,000, and what that does is you have $700,000 to give to the rest of the people there, right? And you can see how these prize pools are. This is a lot better, even though that they have less money overall, right, than last Capcom Cup. The people that didn't, the people that placed last, they still get 5K. Right? I still think this was more. Like, I really wish that this was more. I would love for this number to be 10K, and so on and so forth. But it's a step in the right direction, right? You can see what type of difference it makes, because they have better distribution. It's not perfect. It's not perfect by any means. I still think it could be a lot better than this. And Esports World Cup has their own issues that we should probably talk about in another video at some point. But this is you can see how like we're getting there. Like we're getting there. Like we're talking about people that got 9th got 20K, right? That's great. That's great. You didn't even make top 8, you still got 20K, right? That's fantastic. What happens if you place top 8 in Capcom Cup with a $2 million prize pool? You have 5K. You have 5K for placing outside of top 8, right? That's not great. That's not great for how difficult it is to reach that placing, right? All of that in one. And so we should ask ourselves, what do we do about this, right? What do we do about prize pools in fighting games? It's hard because fighting games are small. They're more niche than bigger games. Obviously, we're pretty small amongst the other esports, but there are things that can be done. But I think people need to really, really understand the conundrum here when we talk about prize pools. And so I'm going to list a few solutions and also list some caveats with it. First thing, sponsorships, right? Obviously, if a company is supplying the money for said event, it becomes much easier to justify there being bigger prize pool numbers. However, one thing that people don't want to talk about with companies coming out of pocket is there's a trade-off there, right? And those trade-offs are something that people have actually spoken on for a long time, spoken out against for a long time. So for example, let's say for whatever reason, Sony, who owns Evo, decides to just come out of pocket, and they just said, you know what, we'll just do a big ass prize pool, more than they already are, because where do you think the 30K guaranteed prize pool has come from? Let's say Chipotle. Let's do Chipotle. Let's say Chipotle was like, hey, we're just gonna give you a lump sum that goes straight to prize pool for the main games, right? What happens? There needs to be a trade-off, right? Because every company is not gonna just throw money at us for free. They're gonna expect something in return, right? What does that mean? You're gonna see product placement in more places. You're gonna see more ads, right? You're gonna see ads. You have to. Yeah, these companies have already put out so much to even let events like Evo happen that they're gonna have to, you're gonna have to see ads. You have to. There's no way around it. Do you want these companies to give us a bunch of money and resources and expect nothing in return? It's just unrealistic if you know anything about business, right? And so like, as you ask more and more from these companies, that trade-off has to be there. You have to watch more ads. You have to deal with more product placement. You might have to see them in more places than just Evo. There might be more events that they're involved in that they weren't in before. That's just something that you're going to have to accept. That's the thing. That's what happens whenever you accept money from an outside entity, right? Crowdfunding. People talk about crowdfunding. Why don't we do Matcherino for Evo and stuff like that? Now, I believe that Evo probably has some contractual restriction that they can't do Matcherino, or else they would. However, I will say that like there's something naturally incorrect with crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a great concept for like weeklies, you know, local stuff like that. That's great. I think people should use Matcherino and they should crowdfund. But when you realize that crowdfunding does not generate money out of the ecosystem, it doesn't come out of thin air. It comes out of pockets of people in the community and goes into the pockets of people in the community, right? It's just moving it around. It's not creating, it's not generating wealth. It's just shifting it from one place to another. Do we really believe that the average person that watches a fighting game tournament should have to come out of pocket for the players that do it for a living to be paid decent wages? No. I think that's unreasonable, right? That responsibility should lie on the companies that are involved with the event and also their sponsors as well. Like, sponsors should be paying people a livable wage if they're going to be playing in this stature of event. And a lot of them are. And that's something that people don't want to talk about as well. Like, some of these fighting game players are getting paid pretty decently, and I think they should, right? It's a skill I hold as valuable. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's just where most of your money will come from. It's just how it is. The idea of like living off of prize winnings, it's just really, really hard to do. The only time that should ever remotely be in the conversation is for Evo or your World Finals. Those are the only two events where I'm like, okay, we can have a conversation about you know, how much are the prize pools paying out, because it's like the ultimate event of the year, right? One way or another. So that's what I think about it with crowdfunding. It's hard to do. Like, you can't do like a Dota 2 method where like they do a compendium and they do a battle pass and, you know, prize pool, you know, like purchases, money goes towards prize pool, right? Because a lot of fighting games just aren't created for that. They just don't have the ecosystem. They don't have the skin lineup. They don't have the art team. They don't have that, right? Some will, like Project L will probably try something like that at some point. And Capcom has done it in the past with SF5. I believe Mortal Kombat has tried it as well. And they were actually decently successful. But all of that is hard to get approval for, right? When we're talking about business, this and that, there's a lot of red tape. You can't just do it, right? You just can't do it. A lot of people want these companies to just do it. They can't just do it. It just doesn't work that way. And so crowdfunding is like kind of weird, kind of odd whenever we talk about bigger events. Smaller ones, absolutely. Regionals, locals, keep doing it. Majors, hard to justify. Really, really hard. I think you're going to be really, really hard pressed to find people that support that idea as time goes on. Okay, next thing, entry fees. Next thing that people say is, okay, so why don't we just charge bigger entry fee, right? You've probably heard this conversation before. Why are we only charging $10 for entry fee? Why aren't we charging $20? Why aren't we charging $25? This and that. And the argument is that they say, you know, you're already paying $200, $300 or whatever to attend these big events. You know, you're paying for your hotel, your flight, all that. What's another $10, right? And I think these people are missing the point. And the point is that there are a lot of people that go to fighting game events, a ton, especially when we're talking about Evo. Evo has the biggest casual percentage of any like fighting game entrant, like easily, right? You're talking about people that are there and they're not super omega hardcore. They're there for the spectating experience, this and that. And if you increase entrant count, like if you increase entry fee, like let's say you go from $10 to $20, that's double. And that might not matter if you're there to only enter one game, but what happens whenever you're there, you get to go to one fighting game event for a year, so you want to play as many games as possible. What happens if you want to enter 4, 5, 6 games, right? It adds up extremely quickly. And what happens is that if you make the prize pool, if you make the entrant fee bigger, then you discourage people from doing cross entrant. Suddenly you get a lot more people that do just enter one game. And there's a tipping point where you've now discouraged a ton of people that would have entered otherwise and put that $10 into the prize pool. Now they're not entering at all, so you get 0, right? You see what I'm saying? And so you can't just send it. You can't just do that, because you are going to reach that point very, very quickly. And I think that's something that people should consider. These fighting game events are not just for us, right? It's not just for the super hardcore nerds. It's for the new people too, right? It's for the people that aren't super into it, but they're still interested. They're still interested. They still want to be part of the experience. They still want to be a part of it. And I just don't think you can justify doing that without a ton of research and care put into it. And that's not research that anyone has done yet. no one has done it on that level. I could tell you the first event to try it, it will probably be a disaster. Yeah, it gets ugly. Okay, next thing, pop bonuses. So pop bonuses are really, really difficult because of what I talked about before with Capcom Cup. Remember when I said, the thing about Capcom Cup is, or Capcom, is that they're never going to do like the $50,000 prize pool for Evo again. Why is that? It's because, like I said, their goal with Capcom Cup is not for the betterment of the community. It's for their own enrichment, right? And so they want all the attention, they want all the money, they want all the positive PR. They want that to be directed at their event and their event only. They don't care about getting in the good graces of players by giving them money at other events. They only want you to care about Capcom Cup and Capcom Cup alone. And so there will be very, very few situations where a dev or a publisher actually puts in money into a non-first party event anymore. It just won't happen that much. As more and more circuits happen, we have to accept this, right? As more and more events get official circuits, more and more companies are going to focus on their own thing. Suddenly the combo breakers and the CEOs and the Evos, they don't care about that as much anymore. They really just care about World Finals, Tekken World Tour, Capcom Cup, Killer Instinct World Tour, Skullgirls World Tour, all that. They're just going to focus on their own for the most part. Funny enough, the one exception to that is I believe Dragon Ball FighterZ, which still put in an extra 5K into their prize pool at Evo this year, even though it was a side event, which is, the same thing that they did last year, which is like, never thought I would be saying anything positive about Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour, but they actually got it this time. So yeah, like it's a difficult sell for these companies, right? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them financially, I feel like, when their goal is to make sure that you only care about them and them alone. Do I wish that they cared more about the greater pixure? Yeah, but unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be a thing. Unfortunately, I don't think that's feasible. I think Project L, 2XKO will be kind of the same way. Riot's always kind of kept to themselves, though, to be honest. Like, Riot's known for like doing a bunch of first party stuff. They don't do a whole lot of third party things. They do their circuit completely first party. They do their own events. I don't think that they'll be providing money to like smaller events. I would love to be surprised if the Cannon brothers somehow stumble across this video. I would love for you guys to prove me wrong. I just can't see it. I just can't see it. I cannot see it. I think they're gonna just sell skins with their freemium model, and they're gonna make shit tons of money from that. And whether they decide to put in some money back into the community at their events, it'll be up to them. But all we can do is really hope. So hopefully this gave you guys a little bit more insight as to why this prize pool conversation keeps coming up over and over again, and also covering some aspects of it that people don't really go over, right? Like, people don't really talk about the stuff that I talked about in this video. So hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and we'll see you in the next video, people. Later.